Greetings, YouTube. I always find it strange when I get requests to do specific topics, but here I am to discuss Ferguson. Now, the one indisputable fact we know about this entire case is that Michael Brown was shot, killed by a police officer. After that point, things become a little muddier. Was he surrendering? Was he charging? Now that we have the state police and the feds involved, I'm hoping we get something vaguely close to a decent investigation. But the people involved in the process, the police force in Ferguson, should have absolutely nothing to do with the investigation. No police force should ever be allowed to investigate its own people. Ever. To my mind, that makes about as much sense as allowing a suspected bank robber to run the investigation of his own suspected bank robbery. I would imagine if we did that, there would be surprisingly few prosecutions. And there are surprisingly few prosecutions against police officers when they do things that many people in the public think that may just possibly have been unsavory. But the one thing we do know about the eyewitnesses is that eyewitnesses counts are horrible. They are incredibly unreliable, regardless of which end of the narrative is being supported by the eyewitness report. So I'm hoping by the time this investigation finally wraps up, we will have something that resembles an outcome of reality. But I don't know. I'm not sure if the narrative has run its course to the point where it can no longer fit what actually happened. There are two competing narratives here. And I'm not sure which one's going to win. I'm not sure that either is the truth. But for me, the bigger issue is the revolution in the streets. Now, you'll note I call it a revolution and not a riot, because I'm not seeing it as a riot. I'm seeing it as a revolution. The people of this community were feeling oppressed by the police force, a community that is 2/3 black, with a police force that had 50 white members out of 53. And a long-standing history of oppression of the black majority of the city. To my mind, it felt a whole lot like apartheid. Now, that in and of itself could explain the justification for the revolution. But the response of the authorities, both on the local and on the state level, has been abysmal. If there was a script that these police forces could have followed, that would have been the absolute worst tactics to take, they took them all. They've rolled armored vehicles against civilians in this instance. Armored vehicles against civilians in the United States of America. You're not seeing a whole lot of play in the media about that now, are you? I wonder why. But for me, beyond the fact that this police force may very well be rife from top to bottom with bigotry, is how the individual officers on the ground have responded to what's going on around them. And one of the things they did was to strip off their identifications and their badges. And as soon as they did that, they stopped being cops. When you have a group of people that are all wearing the same colors, who are armed and attacking civilians in the street, who aren't part of an authority structure, you know what we call them? A violent street gang. Thugs. Which is exactly what those former police officers became. I say former because as soon as they took their IDs and badges off, they stopped being cops. They became thugs. And what society does to thugs is that you arrest them. And that's what we should do to every single cop that took his ID off in Ferguson. Arrest them and throw them in jail. And hold them without bail. There are Crips and Bloods in Ferguson that were protecting the property of business owners, while former police officers were firing rubber bullets into the faces of civilians. launching multiple tear gas rounds into crowds, attacking again and again and again, driving vehicles into crowds. Why? Well, that's what thugs with firearms and armored vehicles and trucks and tear gas can do. Because they can. Because they were exercising their might. All dressed out in pretty camo. Helmets. And body armor. Pointing automatic weapons at crowds of civilians. An Iraqi veteran witnessing the situation in Ferguson said, "We rolled lighter than this in war zones." The militarization of the police forces in America has to stop. Police forces are supposed to be about protecting and serving. They are not armies. Armies occupy and oppress and destroy. Now, the wealthy really want a private army to protect their interests. In particular, they want to protect their interests against all the people that aren't members of the wealthy. And their agenda has been going on just swimmingly so far in turning the police forces of America into a private army for the people in power. And it's time that the people in the streets stop that. I do not advocate violence. I think the best thing we could do is register every single person in Ferguson to vote. To make sure that every single person in America who can vote against the militarization of police forces, who can vote against money in politics, who can vote against the wealthy running our nation, does so. Sometimes politics comes out of the end of a gun. Right now we've been lucky. The rounds coming out of those guns have been tear gas and rubber bullets. How much longer will that be the truth if we allow the militarization of our police forces to continue? There's something very wrong in America right now. Something profoundly broken. But I think we can fix it. The best way we can do it is to work within the system. There may be a revolution in the streets right now in Ferguson, but I would prefer political action. I want political will brought to bear on the problems at hand. And I want those people in the streets, those former police officers, every single unjust member brought to justice.